It was the middle of the night, and I was driving through a thunderstorm. The wipers were going crazy and the rain was blinding. Suddenly, through the torrential downpour, I saw a flickering neon sign. It read, "Open 24 hours," which must have been part of a motel. I turned into the gravel parking lot and skidded to a stop in front of the office. A man looked up from behind the counter. He looked at me and then at the road. "You're not gonna like this weather, hon," he said, his voice gravelly like sandpaper. I stepped out of my car, water dripping from my hair and clothes. "I don't care," I said, shivering. "I need a room." The man sighed and reached for a key. "Just one, huh?" I nodded. "6, he said, handing me a key. Then he added, "Don't ask me why it's not 5. I thanked him and headed to the room. As I walked along the wet, cracked asphalt, I saw that the man had drawn a circle around room 6 on the motel map. I shrugged off the feeling that something wasn't right and unlocked the door. I stepped inside and instantly regretted it. The carpet was soaked, and the air hung heavy with the smell of mildew. On the wall was a large stain that looked an awful lot like blood. And then I saw a second one. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. This place gave me the creeps, but it was too late to check out now. I dropped my bags by the bed and went to look out the window. The rain had stopped, and the clouds had parted. A sliver of moonlight peeked through and illuminated the parking lot. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Maybe it would be okay after all. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps in the bathroom. I froze. Was I imagining it? I told myself it was just the pipes. But then the footsteps came again, louder this time. The sound of someone dragging themselves closer and closer to the door. I couldn't help it. I ran to the bathroom and flung the door open. Empty. The footsteps stopped. I let out a shaky breath and closed the door, leaning against it. I told myself it was just the pipes. I turned on the light and looked around the room. It was sparsely furnished with a TV, a small desk, a bed, and a wardrobe. There was nothing else. I tried to distract myself by unpacking, but my hands trembled and the clothes slipped through my fingers. I could still hear the dragging footsteps outside the door. Whoever was making them was getting closer. I backed away, bumping into the wardrobe. I stared at the door. What if I opened it and there was someone standing there? What if whoever was outside wanted to get in? Fear coiled in my stomach. I didn't want to find out. I heard a knock. My heart leapt into my throat. Knock! Knock! I pressed my back against the wardrobe. Don't open the door. Whatever was out there wasn't welcome. Knock, knock! The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Please, please, go away! Knock, knock, knock! The door rattled. I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed. When I finally opened my eyes, the door was still there. I let out a shaky breath. I was safe, for now. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my things and ran to the door. As I fumbled with the lock, I heard a dragging sound. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. The coast was clear. I slipped out into the parking lot. Safe in my car, I slammed the door and locked it. I could still hear the footsteps. They sounded so close. I started the engine and threw the car into reverse. The motel flew by in a rush of neon and rain. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. I pulled over at a gas station and got out. Water dripped from my hair, but I didn't care. I was soaked in a different way, too. The clerk from the motel had a strange look in his eye, and when he handed me the key, he'd seemed almost relieved. I remembered the circle on the motel map and the blood-like stain in the room. My skin crawled. Suddenly, the footsteps pounded on the pavement beside me. I whirled around. No one was there. Shaking, I filled my car with gas and drove away from that place. Back at the motel, the clerk watched my car disappear down the road. A sad smile touched his lips. He picked up a key ring with a tag that read Room 6 and walked toward the office. As he passed the mirror, he caught his reflection and stared at his hand. It was covered in blood. The wind was so strong it tipped over the trash cans. The rain was coming down in buckets. I ran for cover, soaked to the bone within a minute. The buses had stopped running. There was no way I was going to make it home in this weather. I needed a plan B, and fast. That's when I saw it, the last bus shelter of the night, empty except for one man. He was wearing a long, dark coat that reached his ankles, pulled tight against the wind. The hood hid his face from view, but every now and then he would lift his head up and look at me without blinking. It was weird, unsettling, but I had no other choice. I joined him in the shelter, grateful for the small amount of shade it provided from the relentless downpour. But as I waited, I couldn't help but steal glances at the man. Why was he here? Where was he coming from? The more I observed him, the stranger he seemed. He didn't have an umbrella or a hat. His hair, which was the color of ashes, was long and unkempt, falling over his shoulders. His face was pale, almost translucent, like the skin on a corpse. And those eyes, they were sunken and deep-set, gleaming with an eerie light. They seemed to pierce through me, seeing right through my soul. Then, as suddenly as it began, the rain stopped. The clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon. In the distance, I heard the rumble of thunder. Lightning flashed, illuminating the man's face. For a split second, I saw a smile creep across his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It was something wicked, something predatory. Before I could react, he lunged. His long, skeletal fingers wrapped around my throat. Panic surged through me. I thrashed wildly, clawing at his face, but he was too strong. He lifted me off my feet, carried me to the bus shelter. I screamed, my voice lost in the wind. He opened the door, gestured for me to get in. I hesitated only for a moment, then got in. As the door closed behind me, I risked a glance back. The man had vanished. The bus was empty, the seats cracked and torn, the windows grimy and spiderwebbed. I sat down, still trembling from the man's touch. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from there. That's when I noticed the driver. He was slumped over the steering wheel, his head hanging low. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I reached out, touched his shoulder. His head snapped up, revealing a face as white as bone, his eyes black and bottomless. I recoiled in horror, but the driver just stared ahead, his gaze fixed on the road. As the bus lurched forward, I looked out the window. We weren't on a road. We were in the middle of a dense, dark forest. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches bare. In the distance, I saw a faint glow, a light that seemed to pulsate. The driver turned his head, his lips splitting into a grotesque grin. "Where are we going?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his hand skeletal and gray, and pointed to the light in the distance. I stared ahead, my heart pounding in my chest. We approached a clearing, and as we did, the light grew brighter, revealing a rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Harmony Ridge Sanatorium." The driver slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and rushed to my side. "Get out," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "It's time." I stumbled out of the bus, my legs weak. As I looked back, I saw the driver's face transform into something monstrous, his skin turning green, his eyes glowing red. With a jolt, I turned away, rushing towards the sanatorium, desperate to escape the nightmare that awaited me there. This happened when I was about 12 years old. I had an upstairs bedroom window that faced the abandoned house next door. It was just an old, dilapidated house that had been empty for as long as I could remember. At night, I'd often see what looked like a pale face staring back at me from the dark upstairs window of the house. Whenever I told my mom or dad about it, they would just tell me that the house was empty and that there was no one there. One particularly stormy night, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a flash of lightning. And when I looked out my window, I saw the face again, but this time it was illuminated by the flash. I distinctly saw the person raise their arm and wave at me. Of course, I waved back, though I was a bit scared at this point. I don't think my parents would have believed me if I told them about this, so I just went back to sleep. The next morning after this, I got up and went to the kitchen to eat breakfast. And that's when I told my dad about the previous night. He didn't believe me, but he agreed to come and check the house with me just to rule it out. We walked over to the abandoned house next door and peered through the grimy windows. Everything we could see inside was covered in a thick layer of dust, which made sense because the windows were all shut tight, and there was no way anyone could have gotten in or out without us seeing them. The only exception was my dad's. The window was wide open. Dad and I looked at each other surprised. Then he said, "Well, that's weird," and started walking towards the house. I followed him closely behind. As we walked into the house, the floorboards creaked ominously, and as we got closer to the stairs, I could feel my heart beating faster in my chest. When we got to the top of the stairs, we realized that the only light in the whole house came from the window at the end of the hallway. As we got closer, I could make out 2 sets of wet footprints in the dust. They led from the window to the corner of the wall where they abruptly ended. There was no sign of a door or any other way that someone could have gotten in or out of the house. My dad and I looked at each other again, this time with wide eyes. We didn't say anything. We just slowly backed out of the house and called the police. When the police arrived, they searched the house but found nothing. They dusted off the furniture to reveal that it was all covered in my dad's tool prints. Apparently, he had been there not long ago. The police also noted the footprints, but they assumed that whoever had made them had come in through the front door, which was slightly ajar. They closed the door, took one last look around, and left. My dad and I looked at each other again, but this time we both had knowing smiles on our faces. We didn't bother telling the cops about the window because we both knew they wouldn't believe us. As the weeks passed, the police never came back with any answers, and the house remained abandoned. My dad kept telling me that it was all in my head, but I knew what I had seen. I even started keeping a journal to write down everything I remembered about the house and the events that had happened. One day, my dad found the journal and threw it in the fire pit in our backyard. He said that I needed to move on and stop being so obsessed with the house. But I couldn't. I had too many questions and not enough answers. I grew up and moved out of my parents' house, and I always wondered what had happened to the house and if whoever was living there was okay. I recently found an old photo of the house online, and it looks like they finally demolished it. I'm glad that whoever was living in that house is no longer trapped there, but I still wonder who they were and why they never came out of their room. What? Who's there? Who's in the lake? Fishing in the rain was my escape. That night, whispers rose from the water. They were faint at first, but then clear. "Pull us up." My line went taut. I reeled in a soaked jacket. Inside the pocket was a wallet. The photo ID inside was mine. Thunder rumbled and pale faces stared up from beneath the surface, watching, waiting. Their lips moved, but I couldn't hear what they said. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My legs trembled. What was I supposed to do? I looked around wildly for an escape, but there wasn't one. The dense fog pressed against me, heavy and cold. Their eyes glinted in the darkness like a school of predatory fish. I imagined them closing in, their skeletal fingers reaching for me, dragging me down into the murky depths. I pictured their rotten teeth, smelled their decay. Their whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Pull us up!" they hissed. "Let us out!" I yanked the line out of the water, sending the jacket tumbling through the air. It landed on the ground with a thud. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and it seemed like the very air around me was reaching out to grab me, pull me under. Then I heard a splash in the water behind me. Turning slowly, I saw a shape rising to the surface. It was one of them, the one from the photo, beckoning with a finger. I knew I should run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I couldn't move. Then another splash and another until the water around me was churning, the surface boiling. pale arms wrapped around my legs, pulling me down into the black water. I screamed, the sound catching in my throat as icy fingers dug into my flesh. Their whispers, now screams, echoed around me. "Let us out!" they shrieked. "Let us out!" I thrashed wildly, the muddy bottom scraping my skin. Their grip tightened, their laughter echoing in my ears. I could feel their presence all around me, their cold, slimy bodies pressing against mine. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground beside the lake, the fishing rod clattering beside me. My clothes were soaked, my hair plastered to my face. The rain had stopped, but the wind was picking up, whipping the surface of the lake into a frenzy. What had that been? Had I imagined it? The whispers, the faces, the feeling of those icy fingers on my skin? I looked down at my hands, expecting to see scratches or bruises, but there was nothing. As I stood there dazed, I noticed something in the mud beside me, a silver locket. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the intricate design. It was heavy, cold. And as I opened it, I saw a faded photo of a young girl with 2 boys. On the back, the date 1944. Their smiles were bright, their eyes full of life. They were beautiful. And then I noticed the caption, "The last day we were seen." My blood ran cold. I didn't know who these people were, but somehow I knew they were the ones from the lake. I threw the locket back into the mud. What did they want? Why had they shown me their photo? Suddenly the wind shifted, carrying with it a new sound, a new whisper. "Find us," they said. "Help us find our bones." The earth trembled beneath my feet. I looked back at the lake, its surface now calm, the mist hanging low, hiding whatever secrets lay beneath. I knew then that I had to do what they asked, that somehow I was connected to their fate. I owed it to them to help, to bring them home. But where do you start when looking for lost souls? The bell above the door chimed as we entered the school. It was midnight. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder grumbled in the distance. My friends and I had snuck into this abandoned school before, but never in such a storm. We made our way through the deserted halls, the only sound our own footsteps and the wind howling outside. Suddenly, my eyes fell on an open classroom door. I could see a chalkboard in the dim oil lamplight, and scrunched up in the corner, I made out the shapes of desks. I couldn't make out what was written on the board, but it looked recent. Curiosity piqued. I walked closer. The room was empty except for the 4 desks arranged in a rectangle facing the board. I walked in and my friends followed close behind me. On the chalkboard, someone had written, "Detention, 4 students." I turned to my friends, puzzled. What does that mean? There aren't even any teachers here. As if in answer, a desk in the corner screeched and we all jumped. We slowly turned toward the sound and saw the 4th desk pulled out and an unseen presence had taken a seat. Goosebumps erupted on my skin. Was this some kind of sick prank? Who would set this up? And if someone was playing a trick, where was he or she hiding? Then another message appeared on the board. This time it read, "Class begins now." My breath hitched in my throat. Just then, a bolt of lightning illuminated the room. My eyes darted to the windows where dark, distorted shapes danced in the glass. Then I noticed something on the floor beside one of the desks, a chalk outline of a hand. It looked real, like the chalk had been used to trace the shape onto the floorboards. Fear pricked at me. What was this place? Why were we here? And why were we being watched? As another clap of thunder shook the building, I looked back at the door. It was closed now, and I felt a cold hand grip my heart. How had it been open just a moment ago? With shaking hands, I tried the doorknob. Locked, I rattled it. Then I screamed, "Help!" But my voice sounded pathetic and weak, and my friends didn't respond. They were too scared. I kicked the door, but it wouldn't budge. I sank down onto the floor, my back pressed against the door. My friends huddled close, their faces pale in the flickering lamplight. Suddenly, the chalk scraped again. This time it said, "Good." Then another message appeared below that. "I've been expecting you." My mind raced. Who was expecting us? Why? And how did whoever was here know we were coming? Before I could ask these questions, heavy footsteps began at the far end of the hall. They grew louder, closer. Someone or something was coming toward our classroom. I grabbed my friends by the collars and pulled them under the desk with me. We held our breaths, listening as the footsteps stopped outside the classroom door. Then the doorknob turned. My blood ran cold. Whatever was out there had found us. Slowly, the door opened. A tall, gaunt figure stepped inside. The room was too dark for me to see his face, but I could see the evil glint in his eyes. He took a step closer, and a book tumbled from his bag, landing at my feet. I peeked over the edge of the desk and saw the title. It read, "The Ritual." The man bent down to pick up the book. "Looking for this?" he asked in a raspy voice. I nodded, unable to speak. He smiled, revealing teeth that were far too sharp and long. "Good," he said. "Then let the lesson begin." I screamed, scrambling back, but there was nowhere left to go. The walls were closing in. I could feel the darkness seeping into my bones, stealing my breath, paralyzing me with fear. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs were locked, my eyes fixed on the monster before me. He reached out a hand, his fingers like hooks, and pulled me from my hiding spot. I struggled, but it was no use. His grip was like iron. He dragged me toward the chalkboard where my friends lay bound and gagged. "Welcome to your first detention," he hissed. "And since you're all such naughty children, I'm afraid the punishment must be extra special." He turned off the single lamp in the room, plunging us into total darkness. "Oh, I do love a good scare," he purred. "Don't you, Nicolas Cage?" The first time I ever encountered something paranormal, I was 12 years old. My parents had just brought home a brand new mattress for my bed. It was an early 90s hand-me-down from my aunt, complete with a floral pattern that would make your eyes bleed if you stared at it for too long. And apparently, it also came with a free gift. As soon as I lay down on the bed, I felt something brush against my leg. I immediately shot up, turned on the light, and looked all around, but there was nothing there. Assuming it was just my overactive imagination, I got back into bed and tried to fall asleep. But then I felt it again, something brushing against my arm. I screamed and stayed under the covers until my mom came in, sat on the edge of the bed, and told me to get over it. According to her, the only thing that should be in our house is love, not monsters. And even if there were such things as ghosts, they wouldn't stick around when she was there. So I spent the rest of the night sleeping in my mom's room. Now fast forward a few years. I'm in college and I've moved off campus with my best friend Ashley. We have our own apartment and our very own bedrooms. One day, while cleaning out the attic, I came across a box filled with all of my childhood toys. And tucked away in the corner was my most prized possession, my childhood teddy bear. I don't know why I cared so much about this bear. He didn't do anything. He couldn't talk. All he did was sit there and stare at me with his beady little eyes. But for some reason, I couldn't bear the thought of parting with him. So I brought the dusty old bear back downstairs and placed him on my desk where I could see him every day. Then I went to class, work, parties, anywhere to get my mind off of the fact that my teddy bear was slowly gathering more dust. Fast forward again to one particularly stormy night. Ashley and I were home alone. Rain slammed against the windows and thunder rattled the walls. Ashley was busy playing video games, so I decided to go clean out the attic again. As I reached for the box with my teddy bear, I noticed something strange. It felt damp, as if it had been left out in the rain. And when I opened it, sure enough, my bear was soaking wet. I stared at him dumbfounded, wondering how a stuffed animal could absorb water. Before I could ponder the situation any further, though, another crash of thunder made me jump, and I quickly ran back downstairs to hide. I didn't come out until the next morning. And when I did, I noticed muddy paw prints leading from my front door straight to my bed. I followed them and watched in horror as the prints led right up to my teddy bear, who was sitting there completely dry. But that wasn't the worst part. The bear was smiling. And no, that's not a figure of speech. His stitched-on smile was wider than usual, as if he had just eaten something sweet. Of course, I screamed bloody murder and Ashley came running. She looked at the bear, then at me and said, "You're being ridiculous, it's just a stuffed animal." But I knew what I saw, or rather what I felt. Something, or someone, had climbed in through my window during the storm and sat on my bed. And when I say someone, I don't mean a person, because whoever or whatever it was left behind a set of muddy paw prints. "Let's just get rid of it," I said, holding back tears. And that's exactly what we did. I took the bear outside and threw him into the bushes. Then I shut the door and prayed whatever it was that haunted my apartment would finally leave us alone. That is until the next day when Ashley came home from work and found this in her closet. Yep. Somehow my teddy bear had already made his way back inside and was sitting innocently on one of Ashley's sweaters. She called me at school. I ran home as fast as I could. When I got there, the bear was gone. But when I looked out the window, I saw a small patch of dirt on the grass where the bear had been sitting. And once again, the smile was wider than usual. It was one of those nights where the wind rattled the windows and the rain poured in sheets. I was returning home from my sister's, and as I walked, the wind snatched at my clothes and the rain soaked my shoes. The old brick buildings of our city huddled together as if seeking shelter from the tempest, their gables like gnarled fingers pointing accusingly at the stormy sky. As I hurried along, seeking refuge, I passed an old phone booth, its glass window shattered, its roof caved in, the receiver dangling precariously from its hook. It was one of those red emergency call boxes that were meant to be bullet and explosive proof. And yet the booth had clearly been damaged by something, perhaps a wayward branch from the old oak tree that stood guard over the intersection, or maybe a fallen power line. The glass was spider-webbed and hanging by a few ragged shards. The receiver dangled too, swaying slightly in the wind, and it was then that I heard it. A sound that cut through the roar of the elements, a sound that shouldn't have been possible given the state of the booth. The phone was ringing. I hesitated, debating whether to answer. It felt foolish, like speaking into a void. But something compelled me forward. Perhaps it was the morbid curiosity that often overtakes us, the desire to know what lies beneath the surface, the intrigue of the unknown. Or maybe it was something more sinister, a premonition that drew me towards a fate I didn't understand. I reached out, my hand hovering over the receiver. Its plastic surface was cold and slick, and as I brought it to my ear, the world seemed to fall silent. The tempest outside the booth faded away, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the insistent ringing. Then a voice, raspy and weak, whispered into my ear. "Don't go home tonight," it said. "He's waiting." The voice was my own, but distorted, as if coming from a great distance, echoing from a place deep within a cavern or a tomb. The words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. Who was he? Why shouldn't I go home? What was waiting for me there? 1,000 questions pounded in my head, but the voice offered no more answers. It simply repeated, "Don't go home tonight. He's waiting." Then silence. My heart pounded against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape its cage. I wanted to run, to tear away from the booth and seek shelter, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. I tried to scream, but my voice was stolen, trapped somewhere between my throat and my lungs. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, listening to the rain and the wind, waiting for something that never came. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through the darkness, I finally broke free from the booth's icy grip. I ran, stumbling over my own feet, my breath ragged, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. As I turned the corner onto my street, I saw my apartment building looming ahead. Relief washed over me. I was almost home, almost safe. But then I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. My front door was unlocked. I stood frozen, the key I was holding slipping from my numb fingers and clattering to the ground. I could run, lock myself in my apartment, pretend that the night before had been nothing but a bad dream. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Curiosity, fear, or perhaps a strange sense of foreboding. Cautiously, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, the windows black and empty, just as I had left it the night before. I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the silence, but there was no reply. I took a step forward, then another, and the floorboard creaked under my weight. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, watching my every move, waiting. My blood turned to ice, and I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. Fear had stolen my voice, locked my limbs in place, and then I saw them, muddy footprints trailing from the door to my bedroom. They were large, much bigger than mine, and they were wet, as if whoever had made them had just stepped inside from the rain. The last thing I remember is a bus. It was late, much later than it should have been. And when it finally arrived, I got the sense that this was a bus that didn't want to stop. I climbed aboard and slumped into one of the few empty seats. The driver didn't say a word, just gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as he continued to accelerate. I peered out of the window, desperate to make sense of the scant details that flickered past. What was this place? I thought I recognized the road, but all the houses had been replaced by thick, dark woods. By now, the engine was rumbling like an earthquake. And then I saw it, the flickering glow of the station, the refuge I had been looking for. But as we got closer, it became more and more clear that this was not a place I wanted to be. The trees around the station seemed to writhe and twist into unnatural shapes. The ticket machine had been smashed to pieces. The glass on the waiting shelter was vacant, reflecting a shattered image of the world. This wasn't my station anymore. This was something else, something sinister. The bus screeched to a halt and the doors hissed open. I stumbled out onto the cracked pavement and turned to go back, only to realize that the bus had vanished. In its place, a single black feather drifted down from the sky, floating slowly to the ground before dissolving into the undergrowth. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to look inside the station. Maybe there was another bus or a train. I could still get out of here, right? The rusted sign above the tracks declared that this was Platform 3, but I knew there had never been a Platform 3. Just then, I heard a voice behind me. Looking for a train? It was then that I saw him, a tall, gaunt man wrapped in a long, dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. He gestured to the tracks. Then you found the wrong one. You shouldn't be here. I have to get out of here, I said, but he shook his head. You can't. Nothing leaves this station. Nothing but the midnight train. He was right. There was no other way out. The ticket machine had been destroyed and the shelter was just a pile of glass. I would have to take that train. As if on cue, a deep rumble echoed through the night. The man in the coat smiled. It's here. I turned to see a phantom train materializing out of the darkness. It seemed to ooze and pulse like a giant black tumor. The carriages were all the same, windowless metal boxes that hung from the tracks like coffins. I hesitated, fear gripping my heart. Was this real or some fever dream? As the train drew closer, I could feel its cold, dead eyes boring into me. The man beckoned again. Come on, you wouldn't want to miss it. What choice did I have? I stepped onto the train. Inside, it was freezing cold, like an ice box. There was a low, constant hum, like the sound of a refrigerator, and the air smelled faintly of chlorine. I stood there alone as the train rattled forward. We passed the same dark woods, the same twisted trees, the same smashed ticket machines. And all the while, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. That's when I noticed him again, the man in the dark coat. He was in the carriage behind me, and he was smiling, his teeth unnaturally sharp, his eyes glowing with a strange light. Suddenly, I remembered the bus driver's white knuckles, the eerie silence of the woods, the smashed station. This wasn't a train. It was a tomb. And then I felt it. The lurching sensation of a speeding train coming to a stop. The doors hissed open, and the man beckoned again, stepping out onto what seemed to be a vast, featureless plain. All around me, the land was cracked and barren, the sky a swirling vortex of darkness. "Well, this is it. The end of the line," the man said, his voice echoing strangely in my ears. "Nowhere, the place where all journeys end." He extended a hand toward me. "Join me," he rasped, his eyes boring into mine. "We can rule nowhere together." But I had seen enough. I recoiled from his touch. "No, thank you," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I think I'll just wait for the next train back." The man's smile widened, revealing those sharp teeth once more. "Oh, there are no more trains," he murmured. "You're stuck here now, and so am I." He looked away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Stuck here for eternity," he whispered. Just another face in the crowd, forgotten and alone. As he turned back to me, I caught a glimpse of the face beneath his coat, a skull. It was then that I realized that the journey to nowhere had taken us all. My basement apartment was damp. Water would trickle down through the cracks in the foundation and drip onto the floor. The apartment had been empty for years before I moved in, and my landlord had assured me that he'd fixed the leak, but clearly he hadn't. Still, it was cheap, and I didn't care much for ambience anyway. At night, though, the place echoed with strange sounds. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like footsteps pacing back and forth in the apartment above me. That was impossible, though, because I lived in the basement. Then there was the occasional thump or thud from directly below me in the middle of the night. Those sounds always seemed to come from right above my bed. One particularly stormy night, I was awoken from a deep sleep by the sound of heavy footsteps in the apartment above me. I sat up in bed and listened intently. They were definitely up there, pacing back and forth. Then I heard something new, a loud bang followed by what sounded like screams. I got out of bed and walked over to the back wall of my apartment. There was a large window there, but it was boarded up from the inside. The only other feature of that wall was a blank, unadorned concrete slab about 4 feet off the ground. As I stood there staring at it, mesmerized, the sound of heavy footsteps began to approach from the other side of the wall. First, I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps. Then came a loud bang, followed by a series of screams. Suddenly, the concrete slab in front of me began to glow with an eerie green light. I watched in disbelief as it grew brighter and brighter until I could see the outline of a door in the wall. Then the door swung open. Cautiously, I stepped back. Whatever was on the other side of that door was clearly in distress. As I watched, the door continued to glow with that same eerie green light and beckoned me forward with an otherworldly hum. Fear warred with curiosity inside of me. Curiosity won. I walked towards the door and pushed it open. Behind it was a staircase spiraling downwards into darkness. I hesitated only a second before beginning to descend the stairs. Each step was cold and damp beneath my feet. The air grew colder the deeper I went. And after what felt like an eternity, I arrived at the bottom. In the distance, I could see another staircase spiraling upwards. Standing on the first step was a girl. She turned to face me, and I stopped dead in my tracks. She looked exactly like me. I took a step forward, and she took a step back. I continued descending the stairs, and she began to climb the stairs. We stared at each other, mesmerized, until she reached the top step. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I called out to her, but my voice sounded strange and distant even to my own ears. I wanted to follow her, but my legs felt heavy and my feet rooted to the spot. After what felt like an eternity, I finally managed to move. I started up the stairs, each step cold and damp beneath my feet. As I climbed, The air grew warmer, and the sounds of the city slowly filled my ears. When I finally reached the top, the door behind me slammed shut with a resounding boom. I turned to find that the wall was once again bare concrete. The window was no longer boarded up, and the glass was clear, reflecting my own terrified face back at me. I ran to it and threw it open. The fresh night air rushed through the opening, and I leaned out, gasping, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. Had I imagined it all? Was I going crazy? The thought sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from inside the apartment above me. Startled, I quickly retreated from the window and listened intently. There it was again, the sound of heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. Then came a loud bang, followed by a series of screams. I stood frozen in place as the sound of heavy footsteps began to approach from the other side of the wall. Then I heard a loud crash, followed by a series of screams. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to walk towards the sound. I placed my hand on the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. What would I find on the other side? Another staircase leading to who knows where, or something worse? I hesitated only a second before throwing the door open and descending the stairs into the darkness. What do you do when you find yourself trapped in a library with a bunch of vampires? I have some tips. For example, don't go into the basement. A wise librarian once told me, there are 3 things you should never do in a library. You should never eat or drink, use a rubber pencil, or bring a flame source. That's because libraries are made of paper and paper burns. Well, she didn't mention vampire flames, but that goes without saying. The trouble started when I was sheltering in the old library from a thunderstorm. The rain was coming down sideways, and the wind threatened to knock me off my feet. That's when I saw them. Tall, thin figures were moving between the aisles of books, gliding through the stacks like phantoms. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could hear them sliding books off the shelves and whispering to each other in hushed voices. I stood frozen in the middle of the library, unsure what to do. Then a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, revealing one of the figures more clearly. He was tall and pale with sharp features, and eyes that glinted in the dim light. As quickly as he'd appeared, he vanished back into the shadows. I realized I wasn't alone in the library, and I had to get out of there. Fast. But then another flash of lightning illuminated the aisle and revealed a sight that made my blood run cold. Several of the figures were standing in front of me, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. They were vampires. I could feel their presence like a physical force, pressing in on me, their hot, fetid breath on my neck. Fear pulsed through me, adrenaline flooding my system. I turned and ran, dodging between the shelves, desperate to escape. I could hear their footsteps behind me, heavy and measured, getting closer. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, their presence like a shroud. Then I saw a glimmer of hope, a ladder leaning against a shelf, an opening in the upper stacks. I scrambled up the ladder, ignoring the pain in my arms and the scrape of skin against concrete. I pulled myself onto the shelf and pressed myself against the cool, smooth concrete. One of the vampires floated past, his eyes scanning the shelf above me. If he'd looked up, he would have seen me, but he continued on, his keen vampire senses apparently unable to detect me. When he reached the end of the shelf, I let out a shaky breath. I was safe, for now. From my vantage point, I could see everything. The vampires were searching methodically, their movements precise and efficient. Their eyes, even in the dim light, were sharp and intense, missing nothing. It was then I noticed one of them holding something aloft, a silver object that glittered in the faint light, a book. And as they turned the pages, I saw that they weren't any ordinary book. Each page was filled with arcane symbols and strange archaic words. Suddenly, I remembered the words of the wise librarian. There are some things you should never do in a library, especially when you're trapped in one with a bunch of vampires. The one thing I hadn't done yet was take a book. Maybe I could hide if I had something to read. I carefully climbed down the ladder and moved to a nearby shelf, grabbing the nearest book. It was my only chance. As the vampires approached, I hid behind the shelf, my heart pounding in my chest. When they passed, I took a deep breath and opened the book. It was old and smelled faintly of mildew, but the pages were crisp and clear, and as I turned through them, I saw that they were filled with nothing but blank pages except for the last one. On that page, written in a spidery hand, was tomorrow's date, and beneath it, the words, "Your death." The book felt heavy in my hands, ominous and cold. I looked up just in time to see the vampires disappear into the stacks. My heart raced. What did the book mean? Was it a message from the vampires? A warning? Or was it something else entirely? I clutched the book to my chest, its weight a tangible reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows around me. The library, once a place of knowledge and refuge, had become a tomb, a mausoleum of secrets and whispers, and I was trapped inside it with a bunch of vampires who knew exactly how to find me. What is the creepiest thing you've ever seen? Let me tell you. I grew up in a small town, and in that town, there was an old funeral home that had been abandoned years ago. Nobody ever went there anymore. It was just an old building with boarded-up windows and overgrown grass that eventually led to the roof caving in. It was creepy, and of course, as it was creepy, we all dared each other to go there. But nobody really wanted to because it was just so creepy. Then one day, I heard some kids dared someone to go inside the funeral home and ring the bell on the front door. You know, the one that says, "Beware, dogs and strangers." Well, this kid went up to the door and rang the bell, and of course, nothing happened. But then he looked through the window and he saw the shadow of a dog. He ran away screaming. We all thought it was a prank call, until a few nights later when I was home alone and I heard a loud crash followed by footsteps near my house. My mom had gone out of town for the weekend to visit her mother. My dad was out of town on a business trip. My brother was at a friend's house, and I was home alone. I tried not to think about it, but then I heard another crash followed by what sounded like whispers. Then I saw a flash of lightning followed by thunder. The power went out. I started to get scared. Then I heard a knock on my front door. I got so scared I hid under my blanket and just waited. After a while, the knocking stopped. I cautiously came out from under the blanket and went to the window to see if I could see anything outside. There were no lights on in the neighborhood because of the storm, but I could see the flashes from the lightning mixed with the shadows from the trees. That's when I saw them. 3 men in black suits walking out from the old funeral home across the street. They were holding a coffin. One of the men stopped, turned around, and stared right at my window. I froze. I don't know how long we just stared at each other, but it felt like an eternity. Then they walked over to the corner of my street and disappeared from sight. I didn't want to believe what I had seen, so I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light. But then I got up from my bed and went to my window to look outside. In the streetlight, I could see the 3 men standing next to the coffin. They were drenched in the rain. Their faces were pale and their eyes were red, like they hadn't slept in days. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to go outside. As I opened my front door, more screams of thunder echoed through the night. A flash of lightning illuminated the faces of the 3 men. Their eyes were wide and lifeless, like they had already died. I screamed and slammed the door shut. I could hear their footsteps on my porch as they began to knock on my door. I could feel their icy cold breath on my skin. Then I heard the sound of heavy footsteps running away. In the morning after, of course, barricading myself in my room for the night, I went to my front door and stepped outside. The rain had stopped, and the sun was shining. It was a beautiful day. I walked out onto my porch, and that's when I saw it. 3 muddy tracks leading from the old funeral home to my front door. And then in the wet wood of my porch, there was a coffin-shaped outline pressed in it. I don't know what those men wanted or why they kept coming back to my house, but I knew I didn't want to find out. That's why whenever you see an old abandoned building, remember it might not be as abandoned as you think, because sometimes the ones who are dead never really stay dead, and sometimes they come looking for you. My grandmother's house had always felt like a safe haven, a place where I could escape to whenever I wanted to get away from everything. But that all changed one night when a storm rolled in and brought with it an unexpected surprise. It started out like any other day. I had driven to my grandmother's house after a particularly nasty fight with my boyfriend. I needed to get away, so I poured myself a glass of wine, settled into her favorite armchair, and turned on the television. Then the storm hit. As the wind howled outside, I felt a sudden chill. I glanced over at the attic door, and my heart skipped a beat. It was slightly ajar. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling persisted. I got up, intending to go check on my grandmother, who had developed dementia and was in the late stages of Alzheimer's. But as I neared the attic door, a sound stopped me in my tracks. It was a whisper, like someone trying to tell me something urgently. I hesitated, then slowly pushed the door open. Inside, in the dim oil lamp light, I saw it. A diary laying on the floor. Its leather cover was intricately carved, and a small brass lock adorned its front. But it was the whispers coming from the diary that truly captivated me. They seemed to be coming from within its pages. As I reached out to pick it up, the whispers grew louder, filling my head with urgency. When I opened it, they intensified, morphing into distinct words that spelled out a chilling message. But the words were jumbled, making no sense. Then I noticed something peculiar. The diary entries were written in a language I didn't recognize. Panic began to set in. What did it mean? Was this some kind of a sick joke played by my grandmother? Or was there a more sinister explanation? As the storm raged outside, I desperately tried to decipher the words. Suddenly, a thought struck me. I rushed to the bookshelf and pulled out one of my grandmother's old books on ancient languages. Flipping through its yellowed pages, I found what I was looking for, a key to deciphering the diary. With trembling hands, I applied the translation to the diary. As I read the first entry, my blood ran cold. It detailed my birth, my parents' names, even the day my brother was born. Every subsequent entry chronicled major events in my life, my first steps, my first words, my triumphs, my failures, even my fight with my boyfriend earlier that day. It was as if someone had been following me, recording every aspect of my life. And the final entry, dated today, sent a shiver down my spine. It read, "At 3:12 a.m., lightning strikes. He sees the face at the window. He doesn't survive." I looked up at the clock on the wall. It read 3:11. Before I could react, the room was plunged into darkness. A loud crash of thunder echoed through the house. I stumbled back, my eyes wide with terror as I saw the faint outline of a human form in the window. Someone was standing on the other side, their face illuminated by the flashes of lightning. In the next instant, lightning split the sky and illuminated the room once again. The figure was gone. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house. But my scream was lost in the howling wind. Trembling, I closed the diary, my mind racing. Who was that person? Why had they been watching me? And why did they know so much about me? As the storm continued to rage outside, I sat there in the darkness, the diary clutched in my hands, desperately seeking answers in its cryptic pages. But the truth was, the diary held more questions than answers, and the face at the window remained a haunting mystery. As the night wore on, I could hear scratching at my door, persistent and rhythmic. Every time I thought it would stop, it started again. I got up and walked over to the door, my hand hovering over the handle. What if it's just a late-night snack, I thought. My stomach growled in agreement. But then I heard a knock that sounded exactly like the sound of fingernails on glass. Breakfast was a quiet affair. No one else seemed to be staying at the hotel. In fact, the place felt completely deserted. I made my way downstairs where I noticed the front door had been left wide open. I stepped out into the hallway and was immediately met with the same scratching sound I'd heard at my room. It was coming from inside the walls. I followed the noise until I found an air vent and put my ear to it. All I could hear was a faint scratching and what sounded like voices whispering. Then I saw it, a tiny sliver of light coming from beneath the door. I pushed it open and found myself in a long, narrow corridor lit only by emergency lighting. At the end of the hall, I could see a set of double doors. As I approached them, I realized they were ajar, revealing a staircase that spiraled down into darkness. I'm not sure why I did it, but I turned the doorknob and started to descend. The stairs were cold and damp beneath my feet, and the air grew colder the deeper I went. By the time I reached the bottom, I was shivering. And then I saw it, a single flickering light at the end of the stairs. I walked toward it, my heart beating faster with each step. When I got closer, I realized it was coming from a small wooden box. I knelt down beside it and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a silver locket. I picked it up and brushed away the cobwebs. Then I noticed something strange. The locket wasn't just any ordinary jewelry box. It was a music box. And as it turned out, it wasn't empty. When I lifted the lid, a tiny ballerina began to dance. She twirled and leaped, her movements graceful and precise, despite the scratches on her dress and the cobwebs in her hair. I watched, mesmerized, as she danced, wondering who she was and why she was trapped in this old abandoned hotel. But then the music stopped, and the ballerina froze mid-pirouette. I looked around, suddenly aware of how dark it was. I couldn't remember coming down the stairs, only that I wanted to find the source of the music. Now I was trapped in a pitch-black room with a creepy music box and a life-size doll that was dancing on its own. Panic started to set in. I tried to turn back, but the stairs were gone. In their place was a solid wall. I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness. Then I heard a knock, slow and deliberate, just like the scratching I'd heard before. I don't want to scare you, but at this point, the only way out of the room was the way I had come. So I had no choice but to keep going. Back in my room, I paced frantically, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The scratching at the door grew louder, more insistent. Then it stopped. I stood frozen, listening intently. When I didn't hear anything, I slowly approached the door and put my hand on the knob. What if it's just a late-night snack? I thought again. This time my stomach growled louder. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. In the morning, after, of course, not sleeping at all, I checked out of the hotel. As I walked away, I couldn't help but glance back. The scratching sound started up again, and I could have sworn I saw a shadowy figure behind the window. Later that day, I took the locket to a jeweler to have it cleaned. As he worked, I told him about the hotel and the ballerina. He listened patiently, his eyes twinkling. "Ah, so you found the music box," he said with a smile. "That place is notorious for its strange occurrences. People go missing there all the time." He handed me the now pristine locket. "Here you go," he said. "It's just a silly old music box. Don't worry about it." On my way home, I decided to take a detour past the hotel. I wanted to get a good look at the place, to try to understand what had happened there. But as I got closer, I saw that the hotel had vanished. In its place was a row of shops and restaurants, bustling with people going about their daily lives. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the hotel had been, trying to piece together what had happened. Had it all been a dream? Was I crazy? Or was there something more to the story? If you enjoyed this horror story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like for more terrifying tales. And if you want to submit your own story, click the link below. Thank you for watching. The wind howled outside, rain lashed against the window. I sighed, staring at the dancing flames of the candle I'd lit to chase away the darkness. The power had been out for hours. My phone was dead. No way to contact anyone. I was utterly alone. That's when I noticed the full-length mirror across from me hadn't been reflecting the room correctly. The flame of the candle flickered one way and then the other, but it was reversed in the mirror. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I leaned closer to get a better look, and that's when my reflection smiled. I hadn't moved, so why had my reflection moved? And what was it doing? It raised a hand, tapping on the glass as if trying to break through from the other side. Then I heard a whisper, raspy and thin like the sound of autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "Let me out," it said. "Just switch places for one night." I don't know what I would have done, but the lights flickered back on then, and my reflection was normal again. Except its eyes kept following me. They didn't look friendly, not anymore. I backed away slowly, afraid of what might happen if I turned around. But then I remembered my phone. It was plugged in under the kitchen counter. Maybe the charger was still good. I hurried over, ignoring the feeling of dread pulling me back. The phone was cold to the touch, but I felt a surge of hope when I saw the charging light blinking back at me. I answered on the second ring. "Hello? Hey, you. Are you okay? I haven't seen you in ages. How are you?" I could tell it was my friend Megan even before I heard her name. I knew that voice anywhere. I forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just peachy. Great. Everything's fine here. Listen, I gotta go. Call you later." I hung up before she could say anything else. I stared at the phone as if it were a live wire, then hurled it onto the counter. Was I crazy? Had I really just hung up on Megan? I rushed to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared back at myself. What was happening to me? Why did I feel so trapped? I scrubbed my hands under the cold water until my fingertips were raw and bleeding. But it didn't help. Then I remembered the candle flame, the way it had flickered and reversed in the mirror. What if the power went out again? Would my reflection try to come through then? I wrapped a towel around myself and huddled in the corner farthest from the mirror. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to get a grip on myself. I was acting irrationally. There was no way a reflection could come through the mirror. It was just a trick of the light. But then the wind outside picked up again, and the lights flickered ominously. I stared at the door, terrified of what might happen if the power went out again. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing for the sun to rise, wishing it was all just a dream. When I opened my eyes, there was a sliver of daylight at the edge of the curtains. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I remembered the power, the storm. I raced to the window and threw it open. Rain poured in, but I didn't care. The power was back on. I could see the twisted branches of trees swaying in the wind, the flashes of lightning, the angry flashes of thunder. And there, in the distance, a rainbow arced across the sky. I closed the window, letting the warm water trickle down my arms. As the first rays of sunlight streamed into the bathroom, I walked over to the mirror. My reflection smiled back at me. "Good morning," she said, her voice as clear as a bell. "Good morning," I replied, smiling back. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I said, wondering why I wasn't afraid anymore. "Me too," she said. "Me too."